Welcome. Well, I feel a little bit like an alien around here as a requirements engineering guy under testers. Hopefully I escape after my talk. Well, a measurement about how healthy a project is, really. So the Dilbert factor. So if there's less than 1 Dilbert in the walls of your project room, that project is healthy. If there are more than 5 Dilberts on the walls, microphone is here, so probably the microphone is not working. Okay, now it's working, fine. Yeah. So, and if there are more than 20 Dilberts in the project room, you really should care about the project. Well, actually I could run a whole presentation only with Dilberts, taking them off of the walls, but I decided to be more optimistic, and that's the only one. So let's start with what's effective requirements engineering. Short slide about my person. I'm an executive director in Zurich Engineering. That's a 600 plus consulting and implementation company. I'm by myself working there as a distinguished consultant for the topics requirements engineering, product management, lean and agile. So lean and agile are one of my 2 foots as well, very heavily. And I'm pleased to hear this in the presentations before, that lean and agile is creeping in. I'm in the International Requirements Engineering Management. I as well founded the International Software Product Management Association, while I'm engaged in several other things around these topics. So when I was asked about talking effective requirements engineering, I really thought about what is it? And unhappily, I rather got the impression, what is it not? So we all got the experience what it's not. So I started my talk with what's not effective requirements engineering. So what is wrong in the classical approach of requirements engineering? And then I look into sources, and these are obviously agile and lean movements. Where could be things done different? And then talking about these differences as well, and then coming to an end, do we have an objective in the future to merge these ideas, and how could they be merged in the future for really bringing effectiveness and efficiency in our project life? But what we want to do is really to deliver products and services to our customers that customers love. So, old school requirements engineering, what did I encounter in my life? So I once was a large project, real big thing, postal automation, so sending out about 20,000, 40,000 letters an hour, and shaping, designing all these systems. That's one of those 150 million projects that you start running. And that was a very complicated system architecture. We did a requirement specification on system level. We had a requirement specification on component level. We had about 8,000 to 10,000 requirements up here. That lasted about half a year, working with about 20 persons in requirements engineering. We had these huge papers and specifications all over there. And then we discovered that any essential central component and infrastructure didn't work. So about 6 months work on a set of components was just a waste. That's waste. And this is this huge upfront work that we did. So we were based on assumptions and approaches, but we never had real life prototypes to validate that this is working, what the ideas were. So I'd say what we learn out of this is, and this is only one example, I think in this room are many examples, that upfront work, huge upfront work based on assumptions is something we shouldn't do. Just don't do this. A second thing that I learned, validation without real user feedback. So if you really want to be sure that this is the right thing to build, the right product, the right service, you have to validate it. And who's the only one who could validate? That's the user. Guess you're a Ferrari seller. This is why I put a Ferrari up here. Well, put a nice spec of a Ferrari in front of a customer. He says, nice looking car. but put him in the car and let him drive, and he will come back and he will pay you the money right on the table, if he has it. So that's the way to go. We have to validate. And actually, our validation has to be a continuous thing in the future. It's not the thing that they think that today what will be in 1 year, and in 1 year we have the chance to validate because then this year is gone. For example, the innovation circle went back from 6 years in 1990 to about 6 months nowadays. So we have to have fast feedback. Google does it by every time by business analytics in their software. They're deploying for 10% of the people, getting the feedback within days, and then deciding to go on. Long-term planning avoids risks. I think that's one of the biggest mistakes we did in requirements engineering. Because when we start anything, then we're starting here with this amount of knowledge. That's what we really know. And this is what we don't know. These are assumptions. So if we build a plan on assumptions, these assumptions could be truth. I imagine I was in one project. It was a remigration of a rules engine that was planned for 4 years with a Big Bang installation at the end of these 4 years. And we really did well, and we made progress. Project was not red, but after 2 years, the management changed. The assumption was that the management is stable. It doesn't prove to be. And the new manager pointed out, we don't need this rule engine. 2 years work is waste. So this was an assumption. We often rely on such kind of assumption. Mustn't be these risks. Eric was talking about risks. This was one risk. This is a kind of assumptions. So we have to go in smaller steps so we really oversee our assumptions and we oversee our risks. A next failure that I see, that quality can be built in at the end. That happens occasionally. We don't want this because we swear every time we start a project, we swear this time we do it in quality. And then often customers and stakeholders don't know really what they want to. What is the result? They put everything in the spec. Even when we start developing, so the spec gets thicker and thicker, the set of features get thicker and thicker, and we do anything, and because suddenly we have pressure, we have to deliver everything, then we do not build for quality. And instead of starting with what is really the need, what is a small set of needs? And if you look in investigations in software, about 20 to 30% of the features really is needed. All the rest is not needed. Look into Word or Excel. What of these features do you really need? 20%, 30%, or maybe not, only 5%. The rest is waste. So this is what we could learn from classical requirements engineering. But with classical requirements engineering, we develop new ideas as well. For example, this user story idea. That was a development of use cases to user stories, was developed by Ken Beck, actually in a fixed price, fixed scope investment banking project. He was sitting right beside the brokers and he said, well, we don't need to write a big spec. Why don't we put these ideas of what a user needs on a card? And because we're sitting right beside the customer, these brokers that are working every day, why don't we take this card and start a card communication confirmation game? So Alistair Coburn is saying software development is a game of collaboration. So we have to collaborate with each other. And the card is a means to do this. So we stand up front of the card. And the good thing of the card is it's limited. You have limited space, so you have to communicate. And communication is that we talk about acceptance criteria. So what are the acceptance criteria? And that's the source of testing. And we want to know how these quality criteria, these are quality criteria I could verify and validate. So in this simple card game, there's a lot of testing as well and improvement. And the most important thing, we have negotiation, feedback, communication, so everybody knows what the value is. And Eric, sorry that I have to say anything against it. I have to say every single person in the team has to know what the value is of what I'm developing, even testers, even those guys out there in deployment. We developed other things as well, a kind of an requirements abstraction model. I think it's more interesting to talk about the abstraction level of a requirement than to divide it into non-functional and functional requirements. Because the abstraction level is an expression of the maturity of your requirement. So it's still very abstract, you can't develop anything against it. It's very concrete, like on the user story level, you could start developing anything. So what you should do is to develop your requirements constantly from these abstract values, cutting them down, decomposing them, getting more concrete in the order the business needs it. That's something we have to do. And this helps, and even if you identify these abstraction levels, and the agile community does by defining, we are talking about user stories or epics or themes, you could even set quality criteria on an abstraction level of a requirement. And I think what we learned as well, we are going away from this project thinking to a product thinking. So actually we're going away from this, we do a project, run it for a year or 2 years, we're getting these requirements and then feedback on the end, to the point that development of a product and a service, because that is what we're doing, we're developing products and services, is that this is a continuous flow with a continuous feedback that we have to get from our customer side. And this ends up that the complete process of developing will change as the agile community really implies to do. Starting in a small thing, but we have to do it in a coarse-grained organizational thing as well. So how will requirements engineering organized in a coarse-grained, in a company with 1,000 people, with 2,000 people, with big projects? So that is the interesting thing. So in agility, gives us some benefits. So I would take a look on agility under the requirements engineering view. So most important thing from agility that I take with me is that we have feedback, that we have ceremonies, and we have cadences. That might sound strange because everybody is thinking about the daily stand-up. I think the feedback is very essential. As I said on this card communication confirmation game, this is to build up tacit knowledge, and tacit knowledge is a shared knowledge of teams where decisions are drawn in the direction of business value without any paper, but on an informational base, and everybody knows about it. So this is objective directed. We have to care about these objectives in our teams, but these communication will care for this. Then we have ceremonies. So ceremonies are this daily stand-up, we have a review, we have a retrospective. Why are these of so value? I will give you a sample. If you get up in the morning for breakfast, how much do you think about how your breakfast has to look like? It's just routine. You're going to the fridge, taking out the butter. If you have a family with 2 kids, then everybody knows when to use the bathroom because this will have to be in a sequence and so on. And this is a ceremony. So if there's a ceremony, it just is efficient. You don't have to think about it. And ceremonies is you have your time to talk about requirements, you have your time when you really have to deploy anything, and that's regular. You have the time when you talk about requirements means that you will have a meeting. You could plan these meetings for the next year. You don't know what we will talk about in April 2014, but we know that there will be a meeting, and we don't have the problem to get the stakeholders and the users on board because there's a meeting. They will be there. That's ceremonies. Ceremonies help as well in testing. We are used to test. We know how to test. We do it automatically. Because of this, we can do automation because we have those ceremonies. Okay, the next thing that we learned, well, I'm in the right community. Testing, automatic testing really developed highly. So I'm looking at one of the systems we are responsible for in my company. It's an order management system in a telecommunication era. The team size is about 30, 35 developers, highly interconnected with a lot of interfaces in the telco overall IT platform. Within the last 3 years, we invested a lot in testing, automatic testing, from unit testing to acceptance test. We have several thousand acceptance tests running against this system with simulators for interfaces, with everything, with all the user stories that come up from the GUI level. So we automatic this. We couldn't run these tests on our own systems. So we are renting an Amazon cloud, and we are deploying the whole system with simulators to an Amazon cloud, running these tests on acceptance test nightly. So if we run it on our own system, it will run about 2 weeks. If we run it on an Amazon cloud, it will run about 1.5 hours. Costs us $7,000 a year. That's the way to go. So automatic testing on all levels, and to know how to play with automatic testing and build this in those ceremonies really improves, because acceptance testing is testing requirements. And with this communication on these cards, we know what requirements to test when, and they will be automated tested because we are writing these tests. Developers are writing these tests. I don't know if they're called developers or testers. So this distinction, at least in my mind, is disappearing in the future. Well, as I said, this card communication confirmation game plays a big role, because actually what we do is we have kind of a definition of ready, as I talked about. When I take a user story into development, I want to be sure that it has all the attributes. So everybody understood what the acceptance tests are, what we have to do to write the correct acceptance test, what has to be done on the design level, on the architecture level, what code has to be written, what will be the end, how do I integrate this, what is the complexity of this. All this is in this conversation and confirmation game when we talk with each other. And at the end, we have these acceptance criteria that are on that story, and we have a definition of done. And definition of done means as well, we have a specification written, not upfront, because upfront we are communicating more. We are rather doing requirements engineering on slogan and vision and textual ideas like the story cards are. We're not writing upfront a big specification. We're rather writing this specification while developing. So this algorithm, we have to specify these constraints, these decisions that we take, we have to specify. So we will have a specification in the end that's correct, that meets the system we developed. And we could take tactical decisions for the roadmap and release planning in the future based on this specification. And that's something totally different coming out of the Agile world. While Eric, you were already talking about wideband Delphi. So this planning poker game is a perfect thing, like you all taught before, to bring knowledge into the team, because this planning poker requires communication as well, requires to know about what's really behind one of those stories. And the nice thing is that around here we have a very, very perfect feedback demand versus capacity. Because while we are going on, we know how fast we could develop, and we know what of capacity and demand is in our, it's called backlog, so the ordered list of requirements that we are working on. This is the product backlog. So we have a demand and capacity balance here that we could work with. So we learned a lot, but as well, unluckily, if you win on one hand, you lose on the other hand as well. So what did we lose when we went into the Agile community? And you know, the Agile community built up their own terminology. They reinvented everything. So planning poker was ancient thing, a wideband Delphi method, actually described by Steve McConnell as 68 the first time. So they renamed a lot of things. So they lost. What I see as in requirements engineering especially, they're so focused on this development sprinting. So they're anyhow in this box with a wall around against the rest of the company. If I really want to develop services and products that our customers love, I have to go through the whole company from strategy, because our products have to meet strategy goals. I have to build up a roadmap, a product roadmap based on releases for each of those projects. And all these agile things that we see are often now bound into a development era. And those good ideas are not creeping out, and there we have really a border, a wall, a thick, hard wall, because these all thinking outside the development and inside the development. We have to go through this. So this is an issue. I think what's often said is we don't have any documentation. I think that is absolutely false. That's such a nonsense. I hate those guys who tell, now happy, we don't have any documentation, we're just hacking code. Well, in this way, we will develop the next set of legacy trash. Yeah? So we will have a specification, but it looks totally different. As I said, not that upfront work, because upfront we're rather talking about objectives, about visions, about features, lightweight, thin, communication. And then we're developing the specification while we are developing. So this is a continuous flow, and the specification is based on a product level, not for a project. We will have this specification for the product, for the service, so for the life cycle of this thing. And this is something Agile totally failed to address. Well, there are a lot of things. A lot of things. How many of you know at least two of them? Two. 4? It's getting less. All of them? These are benefits that we had from classical requirements engineering, actually. So these are all methods and techniques Agile people miss to do today. I don't know why. These are good things. As Alistair Coburn said as well, I have a box on my side and I got all the procedures, all the techniques, methods in my box. And I don't care if they are agile or classical. If I be in a context and I have a problem, I open my box and I put out one of those methodologies and put it here. If it's use cases in an agile thing, fine, why not? Okay, so what's the point? What's effective requirements engineering in the end? And I think that's a merger of those classical things that we did right and well, with those agile new things that are coming up with all these agile movements. If you find a keen merge of these ideas, I think then we are on the right way. And as you said, Eric, as well, there is no silver bullet. A keen way doesn't mean that there will be the new and one and only and fits all idea about how it will look like. And this is the new approach, the new process, the new waterfall, and we have 1,000 pages description how this works. It means a new merge of these ideas may be different in your company from the company on the other side of the street. So there are so many ideas and techniques that bring value into organizations, but you have to find, starting with some basic ideas, your own merge on how to do it. I think this is a very, very important message. So, but what are my most important points? I'd say if you really go into effective requirements engineering, this product thinking is one of the essential things. I work a lot within the financial industry, and they still have this project thinking. So financial industry could imagine a bank, private banking of a large wholesale bank is an IT platform with about 1,000 applications, with about 2,000 people working on these applications. So the thinking by now is still, I have to get out the next version out, and then they start projects running 3 months, and they're just weird at pointing requirements, at mapping requirements to projects, so they bring out anything. I think the big change is that you identify products and services even in these IT platforms, and you drive those products and services. These are assets in my IT platform, and they have a life cycle. And if I have a little legacy system in there that has a life cycle, and maybe I will do a migration of this legacy system to a new system, and this is this product thinking. And I could do this on ceremonies and cadences as well in agile working regularly. I have to develop these things. I could use, therefore, backlogs and feedback, all this card communication thing, so discussing with people more on communication, thinking about requirements on a different level in these abstractions levels, and to know what are the right abstractions levels for the next thing to do. So then I have to work only on these things and not on everything. So this backlog idea compared with feedback, with communication from stakeholders, from customers. And if these customers are anonymous, I could use analytics like Google does to get this customer feedback back down into the teams. So then I have clear prioritization. Then I have a maturity model for my requirements, like these epics, themes, user stories, task level. And I think the next thing is to keep this in a repository. A product or a service with a lifetime requires a repository. There's everything in. Let's see how that looks like. If you look in the normal life, we see these programs running over 2 years, and then projects will be started. I would say that's not the right way to do. We have a set of programs and business-related projects out there. Maybe FATCA has to be released end of this year, or this product has to be replaced, or whatever. And I have to cut all these development tasks and then to decide what is the prioritization of this. Then I have my program backlog for an organization or for a department in my organization. And I say the most important thing is up here, and I could even work with these agile techniques on the requirements, because this is requirements engineering, on that base that I have a program backlog, and then I cut this in team backlogs that are working on a product or a service to develop these services. I think that's a very essential different technique than we did before. Starting projects, doing delta requirements, engineering these projects. That might look like this. If I have such a program backlog, then I have there my development in sprints. I'm getting regular feedback out of these development areas, how these requirements will be developed, and I have to feed them, and then I could really synchronize my development on the next abstraction level into releases. And these releases are synchronized versions of products that I develop. And the nice thing is I could decide I have an internal release plan that's absolutely independent from an external release plan. And I could say, well, I release whenever I like to. If we go to Flickr, for example, Flickr is releasing several times a day. They just decided I release whenever I got a new version. I know another company, they have internal releases of 2 weeks, like the sprint length, but they decide to take external releases for this type of customers every 3 months, or for that type of customers every month, because they have a different business model. Interesting approach. Oh, well, these abstraction levels, that's about quality, because when I said on a user story level, I have this definition of done, that's a quality criteria definition, and this definition of ready. I could say this as well for epics, themes, and visions, and then I see what do I have to do in requirements engineering to drive this one from a theme level to an epic level, and then to a user story level to put it into development. And suddenly I have a plan where to invest my time, my effort. I'm not investing effort to drive this to a user story level because it's not up there and will not be developed soon. Makes no sense to invest many time today. So this is a very keen idea to spare, to have an efficient way with your resources and requirements engineering. Well, and for sure this product repository. So building up a product repository, if you identify products. I have to say this is one of the hardest things. I did this one with a large bank defining products. So the first round is, what does really a product look like? And if you go in these IT departments, there are about 20 ideas what a product is. So because it's really hard to identify nowadays what a product is if you look in the IT landscape of a large company. So that could be a set of applications and databases and services with an TIBCO bus in between and some GUIs and so on. So defining what really a product is a hard thing. But when you are at the point that you identify the product is, for example, financial transactions, or fraud protection, or something that is delivering a business value, a set of applications that are delivering a business value as a product, then suddenly I could say, well, I'm collecting knowledge around this product. I'm even stuffing different, because suddenly I detect that there will be teams and I will have employees that really know about everything about fraud protection. And they know everything about transaction handling of financial transactions, and they know everything about investment banking. And then I build teams around these knowledge areas that care for a product together with the customers or customers' proxies or based on analytics. Doesn't matter how. That's a totally different approach than nowadays when companies go ahead and say requirements engineering. Well, I have a pool of requirements engineers and a pool of testers and a pool of developers who has nothing to do the next quarter. I put this team together and they care for the next version. You could imagine what is lost. Knowledge is lost. No. So identifying products in your company, caring for products, doing this in an agile way, so getting these agile ideas up to the next level of abstraction in your company is the way to go in requirements engineering. And then we could build up such a thing like a repository. And what's AIR? The always actual vision. So we're always caring for this vision. That's part of the requirements engineering. So this is a continuous thinking about. We have to care for it, not abstract thinking. We are caring today, and then the next time we care in half a year, and then we care about it the next half a year. We're always caring about the vision. We're always caring about these requirements that are down here to develop them further. We invest as it needed to be invested. And we put that in a repository, so we really have a lightweight requirement specification because these are on that level, not on these detail levels. And we really could do a road mapping and release planning on the products that we have in our portfolio and align this with strategy. And I think that's a big step forward if we are really able to align the development of our products with the strategy of our company, having clear roadmaps, having clear release planning, going in a continuous flow that is based on communication and confirmation of what we are doing and delivering products that our customers love. Okay, I think that's what I wanted to address, this merge of agile ideas with the merge of the classical approach, because I'm absolutely convinced that this is really the next step to have effective requirements engineering and high quality products in a fast and ongoing continuous way. So thank you for your talk, for my talk, for your listening, and questions and answers. Yep.
Really interesting presentation. Thank you for that. Well, I want to ask something related to requirements and in agile way of working. So, to be honest, I have only bad experience in agile, working with agile, and when it comes to requirements. I tell you the story, and then short, and then ask the question. So, in V model, we know what requirement is. We know how they map to test cases. There is a technical specification. We know we can map each other. We can have a nice traceability matrix, requirement traceability matrix, and so on. But when it comes to agile, then we start to talk about ethics and user stories and tasks and so on. And sometimes user stories may be a requirement. Or maybe some stories that the team can work on, but still I miss the mapping part, you know, and the connection between the different user stories. Of course, there is a prioritization always, so there are user stories are in priority order. So you have to implement first this one to be able to work on the second one. But still, my experience is that you know, if there are requirements, those requirements are stored somewhere else in a tool. Then user stories are again written in another tool, yet another tool, an agile tool setting, and missing the mapping. So, for example, in your example, on one of your slides, you had a user story that said, as a customer, I can buy a product. Now, is that a requirement? Is that an epic? Is that a user story? How would I be able, so that's my question now, probably the question, how can I say that these are my requirements, these are my user stories, or a task, and I want to map them together, and I want to be able to track that developers and testers in every sprint, they really develop and implement those requirements that I collected together in a place. So that's the question. How do you see that working in Agile?
Yeah. Actually, it's working. There is even a technique that you could use. I don't know if you know story mapping by Jeff Patton. That's a very keen technique to do exactly this. Actually, you're starting, I'm going back to this slide. Down here, this is your story. I want to order a product. And I want to order a product is from the business process about 10 or 15 steps. Then actually I would decompose the most important steps that I want to implement right now. So ending up in when do I have finished this, a product is done, I could order a product, is by implementing a set of user stories. So this is not a user story, this is kind of an epic. Yeah. So for sure there are many tools that support this tracing. But this tracing doesn't matter for the team. This tracing you will find in the order of the smaller requirements, so the user stories are in there. Because when you decide to work on this in requirements engineering, on this I order a product, then I see there are 10 steps. Maybe this is a use case, and then that is the step of events in a use case, and each step of event in a use case is a user story. Then you could put them here in the backlog, and they will be anywhere in this order, because you have to implement them in order. And then you could trace back when all these user stories are done, then this epic, I could order a product is done. No. You're asking me how to implement this, so I have it under control. Either you implement it that you foster communication, the team can do it, that's a thing of, I would say, a skill level of the team in requirements engineering doing that. Or you could support this in larger organizations that is absolutely needed by the right tool infrastructure. And there are tool infrastructures that support it, like Microsoft TFS, Team Foundation Services, or Jira Greenhopper, Confluence combination that you have to establish in your company, but you have to establish this in that way that you could work in this style. And then you could use additional techniques like story mapping to be on the road. Do I really implement my business processes that are going through from end to end? So there are techniques around. If you're interested, we could talk about these techniques in detail later. Yes, could address this.
So you are saying that a requirement may be we don't distinguish between requirements and user stories. And so everything
I don't either.
For the product backlog, everything that is on a product backlog we call an item. Like
yeah, an item.
Or whatever.
Could be a non-functional requirement.
And, but for being a product owner, I'm interested if that particular requirement, say one of the user story, one of the items gets implemented. That means that if I'm getting in the backlog to that point, then it means that all the user stories have been burned. Those that need to fulfill these requirements, so right. I can be sure that this particular requirement that I may mark as in red, for example, then it becomes green, and then that requirement is kind of
And it could end up totally different as you imagine to, because I could give you an example. We were working for an investment banking, and we had to automate the management of funds. So that was done manually, and they want to automate this. And they came up to us with a nice idea of an interface, high sophisticated and fancy, and we could manage all those things. And we say, what you really need is, as you tell us, to automate the stuff. So first, let's concentrate on these user stories that we could automate that thing. And what we did is we used Outlook shared folders. Might look strange, but Outlook shared folders was the first step for automation. And we implemented all the automation in the back office thing, so that went through, and all those reporting were done by these shared folders to report the automation process. And those brokers said, that's fine. Works for us. We don't need this graphical high sophisticated interface. So if we would specify at that point that we don't know in the future everything with a high sophisticated interface, we would probably start with implementing that high sophisticated interface, and then automation would lag. So we looked into this, discussed, and said, well, the automation is an important thing. So we cut out these user stories, put them up with a high priority, and so the high sophisticated interface just skipped into nirvana. Okay.
May I have a quick question?
Yeah.
Just some, okay, about this side. So definition of done and definition of ready. How is it different? So why
It's
do you differentiate?
Well, the definition of ready is that everybody in the team that has its stakes in this user stories knows what to do. So this is when you put it into development. So I want to be sure it's estimated, the testers know what to do, I know how to deploy it, I know side effects from this, everything is prepared so I could develop it.
So it's like the definition is ready.
Yeah, the definition is ready, yeah. So I could start with development. I could put it in a sprint. So it's ready for sprinting, as the Agile community says. And definition of done is, it's done. Yeah. And actually, this definition of ready, you could say as well, if I know that this will be subject, this epic, I order a product, is subject to be developed in the next sprint, then I have to think about what user stories are in this epic. This is the definition of ready for this epic. I have to identify and look for the user stories, decompose this epic into user stories, and plan these user stories in my overall program backlog. This is the definition of ready. And this is actually the requirements engineering process that you then follow. And you could implement this as a tool as well. Then there are epics, and they have a traceability to user stores, and you could have this all under control, even with a good estimation and feedback where you are.
I wonder why you put this sprints and Scrum into this solution. So what is the background? Why not other? Is it something to do with the granularity of the
No.
requirements?
Actually, I was putting Scrum in there to show the value of cadences and ceremonies. If you compare Kanban with Scrum, Kanban is an improvement method. So actually it shows you where your bottlenecks are in your organization, how to organize bottlenecks, is playing with work in progress. But it's not talking about cadences and ceremonies. It's up to you as an organization to build your ceremonies and cadences around Kanban. A Kanban board. When do we meet for the Kanban board? When do we decide about? So, and this is why I took Scrum. Scrum is very heavily addressing these ceremonies and cadences thing. And from my experience, ceremonies and cadences bring efficiency and bring the pressure to automate instead of waterfall. There's no pressure to automate because I do everything at the end and only once. So you do it regularly in the Scrum loop, And this pressure for automation then established by bringing efficiency and the effectiveness in the end, because I have high quality, I have a shared knowledge, I have all those things. That's why I picked up Scrum. But you could start with Kanban as well, but then you have for your cadences and ceremonies. What I see in many companies where I go around with these lean, agile approaches and help them, is that Scrum works for organizations that are less mature in these things. Because if applying Kanban, you have a higher maturity against Agile, because you have to think about these ideas and separate. If you don't know how to play with them, well, you will run into problems.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.